Hello everyone, it's Brian Evans again. I'm glad that you've come back for the third video in our series reviewing albums from my record collection, vinyls that I've collected over the last year and a half. And we're just a fan of good music and 60s and 70s and 80s, and I've been inspired by other YouTubers I've seen and watched talking about this, specifically John Heaton and others. And just their passion and their knowledge has been quite inspiring and helped me begin to build a record collection of my own, and now beginning to go through those. Hopefully you have gotten to watch the first two videos I did of McCartney and the Moody Blues, Days of Future Past from 1967. Both Paul McCartney and the Moody Blues, two of my favorite bands, and I wanted to kind of introduce them and their collections that I have early on in this series. I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball today with our third album, going back across the Atlantic to the United States. Our first U.S. Release was by a U.S. artist, an American artist, and this is from 1968. And this album is called Realization, and it is by Johnny Rivers. Do not know if you had the opportunity before watching this video to listen to this album, but I know a lot of very positive things to say about it, and I look forward to kind of talking to you about this album as we move along here in the next few minutes. This album was released in 1968, not in and of itself, as you might think from this front cover and the back cover, not a psychedelic album, but certainly there is psychedelic vibes and feel to it that we'll see as we kind of go along and talk about this album. Again, psychedelic, that type of music, not something that you think of with Johnny Rivers, but he was beginning kind of right in the middle, we might even say, of a career transition. So of course Johnny Rivers had come to be known as a kind of an R&B and an early rock and roll cover artist, working at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles, had kind of developed a large following. He and his band were known as being very good at doing covers, having great live shows, lots of energy. Lou Adler, the producer, brought him into the studio in 1966, and he recorded two albums of predominantly ballads beginning in 1966 for the album Changes, and then in 1967 with the album Rewind. Both of these albums kind of changing and shifting in direction for Johnny, but also it brought him great chart success. The Poor Side of Town off of the album Changes, which I will review later, reached #1, and Rewind as well had a couple of big hits in the Billboard charts during the year 1967. So fresh off those successes, he came out with this album, which is one of his first kind of really highly acclaimed albums, critically acclaimed. As so many albums in the late 60s, it is really an album that should be listened as a whole. I believe the album is stronger as a whole rather than just its pieces, though there are some really, really strong pieces of music and songs that Johnny Rivers and his band puts together. Say the word band is not exactly correct. So Johnny recorded this album in Los Angeles, and has a very strong California late 60s feel to it, as many songs began to have that were becoming popular in the United States in the late 60s. As a matter of fact, if you do follow music, you know about the musicians, the session musicians that were so popular in Southern California in the 1960s, the Wrecking Crew, men like Hal Blaine and Joe Osborne and James Burton, all of them, Larry Knechtel, all of them are on the band and perform on this album. So Johnny has a very good rhythm section and a very good number of strong session musicians that work with him. So the music is excellent, has a great sound to it, very well produced. Johnny Rivers co-produced it with several, including Blue Adler. And then kind of his main collaborator on the album is a guy named James Hendricks, who was a folk singer that was big in California in the late 60s. They co-wrote several of the songs on the album, and Hendricks played rhythm guitar and helped co-produce it. It's a great, talking about the albums, it's a great package. This kind of triptych look of Johnny Rivers on the cover, this purple and pink colors. So it's got a gatefold sleeve, and when you open it up, as you can see, it's got kind of this California sunset vibe with the lyrics, special acknowledgments, and then kind of this collage piece with several pictures of Johnny Rivers looking very 60s and psychedelic. Here in the back, along with the, again, side 1 and side 2 song lists. The album was released in the United States on Imperial Records. This is the copy that I have. It's in pretty good shape. Actually, the second of these albums that I've owned, the first one I purchased, I found randomly at a Goodwill. I only paid, I think, 75 cents for it. It actually played remarkably well for being a Goodwill album. Did have several scratches, a couple of tracks that I really liked, and so I was able to pick up the second copy a few months ago, which is the vinyl is in really good shape. It sounds great, even for being it was a second pressing, I believe, from 1967. But it does sound really good. So great band for Johnny on this album, and his songwriting I think was really reaching a peak as well. Now he's known for mainly doing covers, and there are some very good and strong covers on this album, though Johnny Rivers does write a couple of his own pieces of music, which I think are actually strong. As we said, he also co-wrote some with James Hendricks as well. Some of the highlights of the album I'll talk about here. The first one is actually the last track on the album. This is actually how I came to know this particular album, Realization. So several years ago, I was on a road trip. I was visiting friends up in Pennsylvania, and driving and listening to the radio, and on satellite radio in the United States, Tom Petty had a channel, and he used to host a show where he would basically DJ different songs and tell stories about them. And of course, Tom Petty had worked in the Traveling Wilburys with Bob Dylan, and so he was referencing songs Bob Dylan covers, particularly on this episode as I was listening to. And he teased this song by saying that we're about to listen to the song that Bob Dylan said was the best cover anybody had ever done of any of his songs, which I thought was an amazing thing to say. Bob Dylan recently celebrating his 80th birthday, so a big deal, kind of a milestone in many ways in popular music. One of the, think of the Mount Rushmore of rock and popular music, that Bob Dylan turning 80 is a big milestone with that. And so to hear Tom Petty talk about the song, but in his autobiography, the song specifically on this album, Johnny Rivers' cover of Positively 4th Street, Bob Dylan talked about and said that it was the best cover of any song of his that he had ever heard, and said that Johnny Rivers captured exactly the feel of the song that Bob Dylan believed that he was going for when he wrote the song. So I thought that was extremely high praise. And then after, of course, Tom Petty tells his story, they played the song, and it's fabulous. And gave me personally a kind of a new appreciation for Johnny Rivers as an artist, and I thought it was particularly strong. And so as I was beginning to look at and figure out, okay, what was this from, doing my research, found out that it was released on Realization. Realization also had another top 20 hit on it, which is the song Summer Rain, which has always been one of my favorite songs by Johnny Rivers as well. So two very strong tracks kind of brought me into this album. But as I said, as I listened to it more and more, I began to feel that the album is strongest listening to it on its whole. Now, if I was to choose the two sides, I think side one is the stronger of the two. It's supposed to be and seen as a song cycle, so there are kind of ambient sounds and interludes between the songs that kind of create just a continuous piece of music. Begins with an interesting kind of a psychedelic version of the song "Hey Joe." Certainly not the version you would be expecting to hearing if you only know it from the Jimi Hendrix version. But this one is it's got a psychedelic feel to it. It's also got kind of a folk rock vibe to it. Great bass by Joe Osborne on the album. I think the bass is fantastic on this album. After that, two slow songs. One by James Hendrix, which is called "Look to Your Soul," and then a song called "The Way We Live," kind of a I would say psychedelic vibe, late 60s vibe to it, written by Johnny Rivers. Then "Summer Rain" by James Hendrix, and then a really good cover of "Wider Shade of Pale" in side one. So I think side one is extremely strong with those. Side two begins with a song called "Brother, Where Are You," which is okay. Got a really good electric piano part in it. A kind of a slower song, "Something Strange," which is co-written by James Hendrix and Johnny Rivers. Scott McKenzie song, "What's the Difference," with a kind of a very folky, laid-back vibe. Then Johnny Rivers song, which I think is really, really strong, called "Going Back to Big Sur," which is kind of just this kind of longing for California nights and opportunities to get away from the hustle and bustle of the big cities before Positively 4th Street ends the album. Definitely encourage you to pick it up on iTunes or wherever you can and take a listen to it. Great album. Very surprised at how strong this album is. It's hard to find any contemporary reviews of it. Retrospective reviews have been pretty strong of this album because of, I think, the quality of the songs and the quality of the playing on it. Johnny Rivers always is a great singer, and he's always brings his best and really puts his whole heart and soul in the songs, and you really get a feel of that on this one. So please check out Realization by Johnny Rivers. Several Johnny Rivers albums that I'll review as we go along, but this one by far is my personal favorite of his, and I just think one of my favorite albums that I own. I think it's a great listen, as well as just a beautiful package, very well done all the way around. So cannot recommend highly enough this gem from Johnny Rivers called Realization. See you next time.